Let's get straight to the point. If you're counting on extra time accommodations on the LSAT, if that's part of your game plan, there's a storm on the horizon you need to know about. There's growing speculation that an incoming Trump administration could push the Department of Justice to crack down on what they see as too liberal policies for granting that extra time. If that happens, it could mean a major shift in how future lawyers approach one of the most critical exams of their career, the LSAT. Today, I want to walk you through exactly what these signals might mean for you as a law school applicant, how they could transform the playing field, what you could do about it, and the steps you should consider taking now before policies shift. By the end of this, you'll have a clearer understanding of the challenges ahead and some strategic moves to future-proof your approach. First, for those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my own LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. First, let's talk about the big picture here. The Trump administration has clearly taken aim at what it calls wokeness in education. And that's not just about pronouns or the curriculum. It could easily spill into policies that shape standardized testing. These tests are considered gatekeepers to professional fields like the law, and the perception that accommodations have become too generous might not sit well with an administration committed to a more traditional merit-first vision of education. Now imagine what this means for the Law School Admission Council, the group that administers the LSAT. Right now, LSAC follows well-established guidelines under the Americans with Disabilities Act. They grant accommodations to test takers who document their needs. But what if a new DOJ decides to narrow the scope of what's considered a real disability under the ADA? That could mean tighter requirements, more paperwork, longer approval times, and yes, more rejections of accommodations. The message would be, prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that you need that extra time or you're not getting it. For reference, LSAC used to only approve 70% of requests for extra time accommodations. Now they approve 98% of requests, which means basically if you provide the documentation, if you get a doctor to sign off, you're probably getting whatever it is you're asking for. That could be time and a half, that could be double time, triple time, or more. I've even heard of students getting up to 160 minutes per section on the LSAT when standard timing is only 35 minutes. And so LSAC has made themselves a pretty easy target by being so liberal about granting the extra time. Now, you're also going to want to watch for the Trump administration's repeated mention of using federal funding as leverage. Picture this scenario. The other thing you're going to want to watch for is the Trump administration's repeated mention of using federal funding as leverage. Picture the following scenario. If LSAC or other testing organizations rely on certain forms of federal funding, either directly or indirectly, they could face pressure to align with stricter accommodation standards. The administration could say, you want to keep those funds? Well, then show us that you're not just handing out extra time to anyone who claims stress or anxiety. Overnight, LSAC might fear losing federal support unless they toughen their stance. And this isn't just a guess. It's exactly how policy enforcement often works because money talks. Next, you want to consider the accreditation overhaul Trump has hinted at. He's openly said that he wants to fire current accreditors and bring in new ones who prioritize a more conservative view of education, something that protects what he calls Western civilization and traditional values. If that happens, the definition of what's considered fair in testing could change. Future accrediting bodies might set standards that push LSAC to justify every accommodation they grant. The ripple effect would impact students caught in the crossfire as policies shift and bureaucratic red tape piles higher. We've also got to talk about civil rights enforcement. Under a conservative lens, the DOJ could claim it's actually enforcing fairness by preventing unwarranted accommodations. The irony here is obvious. The ADA here is all about guaranteeing a fair shot, but a narrowed interpretation would argue that fair shot is being twisted into unfair advantage. And that narrative could lead to new criteria setting a higher bar for what it means to have a substantial limitation. Even borderline cases, like students with milder learning differences, might find the door to accommodations slammed in their faces. Now, you might ask, has this kind of shift happened before? Historically, under Trump's first term, we did see changes in educational policy enforcement, like alterations in Title IX guidelines. Those changes showed that this administration isn't shy about rewriting rules it considers too progressive. Considering that trend, a second Trump term might mean a similar overhaul in how accommodations are viewed and granted. Now, let's break this down into actionable insights for you as a prospective law student. First, don't bank on getting extra time. If your entire testing strategy hinges on getting extra time, you want to start prepping as if that might not be available. You want to strengthen your LSAT test taking skills now. Second, you want to document your need for accommodations thoroughly and early. If you have a legitimate disability, get your paperwork in order, whether it's consulting professionals, getting your diagnosis, and having a clear paper trail. In a stricter environment, sloppy documentation isn't going to cut it anymore. You might want to also consider seeking legal advice. If you're concerned about losing your accommodations, you could consult with disability rights experts, because if you know your rights in advance, you won't be scrambling if the policies change. Also, keep an eye on any DOJ announcements, LSAC policy updates, and shifts in accreditation, because small changes in wording can have big consequences for test day. And consider taking time to practice tests under standard conditions if you don't have accommodations. And if accommodations shrink, or if LSAC becomes more conservative, denying accommodations that you would have granted in the past, you'll be ready. And if the accommodations remain, you'll be overprepared, which is never a bad thing. Now, these steps won't just help you navigate a hypothetical Trump crackdown, they'll make you a more resilient test taker either way. Law school admissions is competitive, and relying solely on accommodations is not a great strategy. If you strengthen your baseline performance, you're not going to have any regrets. And if you'd like my help becoming a stronger LSAT test taker, strengthening your skills, getting your practice test scores into the 170 plus range, my team and I would be glad to help you out. At LSAT Unplugged, we offer live online classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. You can check out the links below to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. And we have plenty of experience helping students with extra time accommodations or not. And we can adjust your study plan accordingly, breaking down how to get ready for test day, whatever your scenario is. Now, remember that any policy shift like this takes time. It's not going to happen overnight, and there could be pushback, whether through lawsuits, advocacy groups, or a public outcry. But the rhetoric and signals from the incoming administration are out there, and it's always better to anticipate changes rather than to be blindsided later. So treat this scenario like a case you're prepping for. Analyze the arguments, consider counter arguments, gather your evidence, and make contingency plans. You want to be the law school applicant who's ready for anything. Embrace the uncertainty, strengthen your core skills, and position yourself to succeed no matter what. That mindset's going to serve you well, not just for the LSAT, but for your entire legal career. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.